Hi again YouTube, it's that one guy in lit class, and today I'm going to talk to you about verbals, a part of English grammar that can be really confusing, especially if you're learning it for the first time. Let's start with a basic definition. A verbal is a word that is normally used as a verb, but it's being used in this case as another part of speech. And verbals come in three distinct categories: gerunds, participles, and infinitives. And let's talk about gerunds first. Put simply, a gerund is a verb that is being used as a noun. Like any noun, a gerund can function as the subject of a sentence, as its direct object, as a predicate nominative, or as the object of a preposition. Occasionally, you'll see gerunds as indirect objects, but I'm not going to cover them in this video. Gerunds always end in ing. To give you an example of a gerund as a subject, look at the following sentence. In this sentence, the word running is functioning as a gerund. Running in this case is not being used as a verb because no one in the sentence is running. Instead, it's used as a noun to talk about the subject of running, and the verb in the sentence is the word is. Here's another example. In the sentence, his favorite hobby is running, running is again being used as a noun, in this case as a predicate nominative renaming the subject hobby. On the screen, you'll see examples of a gerund being used as a direct object and the object of a preposition. Remember that to find a direct object or predicate nominative, one of the easier tricks is to ask yourself what the verb is. Like, his favorite activity is what? Or he enjoys what? If your answer tells what something in the subject is by renaming it, it's a predicate nominative. If it simply tells what the verb is or does, it's a direct object. Remember also that predicate nominatives always follow linking verbs. One easy way to tell if a word is a gerund is to replace the word that you think is a gerund with the word it. If the sentence still makes sense, the word is probably a gerund. However, note that this doesn't always work with gerunds being used as predicate nominatives, because those usually follow some form of the verb is, which won't always sound right. In this slide, for example, you can replace all the writings in the top sentences with it and it'll be fine, but the one on the bottom, the predicate nominative, doesn't read very well with the replacement. The second verbal I want to talk about is the participle. Like gerunds, participles can end in ing, but they can also end in en or ed or d or a number of other irregular endings. Unlike gerunds, participles are not acting as nouns, but instead are acting as adjectives. In English, we have two kinds of participles, present and past. Present participles always end in ing, just like gerunds. Past participles are the ones that can end in ed or en or all their regular ones. Here are some examples that illustrate the difference between a present participle and a gerund. Notice that in the second sentence, walking modifies man by telling us what kind of man he is. In this sentence, eats is the verb, and if you'll recall your adjectives, you'll know that adjectives answer three questions: what kind, how many, and which one. Since this walking answers the first of those, what kind, we can safely say that it is an adjective. This is also a good time to talk about verbal phrases. Both gerunds and participles can exist as part of phrases, much like a prepositional phrase. Take the following sentence. Walking around the park, the man eats ice cream. In the sentence, walking around the park is a participial phrase, because the whole phrase is part of the description of what he is doing. Notice that a participial phrase can incorporate a prepositional phrase as part of its description. In this case, the preposition is around. A gerund phrase might look something like this. In this sentence, the phrase eating too much ice cream is a gerund phrase. The whole phrase is acting as the subject of the sentence, with the verb phrase will result following it. The third and final verbal is the infinitive. In my experience, infinitives are the easiest to identify but the hardest to classify. By definition, an infinitive consists of the word to plus the basic form of a verb. Some examples are to fly, to swim, to eat, to make, to play, etc. The problem with infinitives is not finding them. They usually stick out in a sentence because of the word to. The problem comes from telling what part of speech they are, because infinitives can function as nouns, and thus can act as subjects, direct objects, and predicate nominatives, though you don't really see them acting as the object of prepositions. However, they can also act as adjectives and adverbs. In order to classify them, it's necessary to have a pretty good working knowledge of what those three parts of speech are, and how to identify them. We talked about the three questions adjectives answer in the participles section, and we talked about the various roles nouns play in the gerund section, so go back and rewatch those if you need to. A brief refresher now on adverbs. They answer four questions: how, when, where, and to what extent. And they modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. I'm going to add to this a trick that I learned about identifying infinitives as adverbs versus direct and indirect objects, which, remember, are types of nouns. If the infinitive answers why a verb is being done, it's usually an adverb. If it answers what the verb is doing, then it's usually an object or a predicate nominative. These examples help illustrate the difference. Keep in mind, though, that not all infinitive adverbs answer the question why, like in the third example here. Like gerunds and participles, infinitives can exist as part of a phrase, which is called, unsurprisingly, the infinitive phrase. So in the example from before, she came to the party to eat ice cream, we have the infinitive to eat. It is part of the phrase to eat ice cream, and it answers the question why she is going. This sentence also illustrates one of the things people can get confused about when talking about infinitives. Not every use of the word to is part of an infinitive. To can also be used as a preposition, which is how it's used in the phrase to the party. Keep that in mind when you're looking for infinitives. Rather than working through a whole series of examples, I'm going to give you a chart here that gives some basic examples of how infinitives are used as nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. Be sure you understand why these infinitives are classified the way they are. Now, as with all English grammar, there are some exceptions to the rules I've given in this video, but this should hopefully give you a basic starting point for understanding verbals and how they work. And besides, to cover every exception would be a very long and tedious video to watch. I hope you enjoyed this. As always, leave comments and questions down below. Cheers!